my computer.
I love the little Zoom voice that tells me I'm being recorded. It makes me so happy. Hi, how are you, Hannah?
I'm doing well today. Lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. I am so honored that you invited me to do a little Ask the Sexpert for you and the community that you work with. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
I like to let everybody know kind of a little bit about who I am. And I think that that helps people decide for themselves whether they want to trust the advice and the information that I'm sharing with you all. My name is Lucky. My pronouns are she and her. I actually live in the Milwaukee area now, but I met Hannah when I was living in Eau Claire, and we became fast friends, although we were both too busy to spend very much time together, unfortunately. We did have a nice run of Friday morning breakfasts, though, for a while. That made me super happy. But I'm back in Milwaukee. I'm a sexuality educator. I work for the Tool Shed, which is a mission-based education-based, mission-driven sex toy store in the Milwaukee area. Our entire staff is filled with sexuality educators who can ask questions any day of the week. And we also sell some wicked cool sex toys as well. I am also a community midwife serving the Milwaukee area, focusing my work on serving queer families and ethically non-monogamous families, although I do definitely have families in my practice of all kinds of different demographics. So that's a little bit about me also. So yeah. Did you get some questions ahead of time for this big event, Hannah?
Yes, I did. I have some.
All right. Well, why don't you start me off with like a little softball? Just toss me something easy to get started.
Easy. What is an orgasm? Is that an easy one?
It is pretty easy, actually. We get really kind of wrapped up in like, am I having orgasms, and am I having enough orgasms? Am I having the right orgasms? Are clitoral orgasms better, or vaginal orgasms better? Or for people with penises, like, do I need to have a prostate orgasm to have the world's best orgasm? So basically the answer to that is an orgasm is the involuntary kind of clenching and releasing, so contraction and expanding of the muscles of the reproductive organs, the pelvis and the pelvic floor. That it typically happens in response to direct sexual stimulation. So clitoral stimulation, vaginal stimulation, anal stimulation, penis stimulation, prostate stimulation. Although it can definitely happen in response to other things as well. And a lot of people aren't sure if they're having orgasms, or they think they haven't had an orgasm. And if you go through like the other things that causes those little muscles to clench and a little release again, sometimes that happens if we get a really sexy text from somebody that we're into, or somebody we're in a relationship with, and you feel that little down low clench that gets your attention and then goes away. Or somebody could say something really hot in your ear and that'll do it. Sometimes other stimulation of other body parts can do it too. Ears are a big one, neck, nipples. But I actually once did an Ask the Sexpert where someone told me that they had a tattoo in the middle of their back, and when their partner licked their tattoo, they would have that happen. So that at its very foundation is what an orgasm is: the involuntary clenching and releasing of the muscles of the reproductive tract and the pelvis and pelvic floor.
Great. I think related to that, you mentioned vaginal orgasms, and I get lots of questions. I've gotten lots of questions about that teaching previously, and like, is the Gspot real? Like, can you explain more about all the confusion related to that?
Yeah, totally. The Gspot is real. And if you were born with a vagina, then you almost certainly have one. There's like a lot of mystery around this, and it's kind of silly that there's so much mystery, because there's a very easy physiologic explanation of where it is and how to find it. Unlike, say, the Bermuda Triangle, which may or may not be real. And we don't know, because anyone who's ever gone there never came back to tell us about it. So but the Gspot is, G stands for Grafenberg, which is some man doctor who discovered it for us and got to slap their name on it. Very Columbus circa 14, whatever, 16. I don't know my history anymore. Anyway, what it really is, and it has a anatomical name. It is the urethral sponge. So from the bladder, which in people with a vagina is right behind your pubic bone, the bladder's right there. There is a little tiny tube that brings urine out of your body, and that tube is called your urethra. And the opening at the outside of the body where your urine actually leaves, where you pee from, is your urethral opening. All around that urethra, as it travels from the bladder down to the outside of the body, is a tube of spongy tissue. That spongy tissue can become erect when a person is aroused. Stimulating that spongy tissue when someone is aroused can feel really good to a lot of people. Not everybody. Some people really don't enjoy that. But a lot of people really do. And so that is what the Gspot is. The Gspot is that tube of spongy tissue called the urethral sponge. You find it on the front wall of the vagina, about 2 to 3, depending on how long your fingers are, knuckle deep inside, and you put direct pressure forward like you're pushing up on someone's pubic bone to find it. If you're doing this for yourself, it can be a little hard to reach. You might want to get a toy or a friend. If you're doing this with a friend or loved one, you will know if you have found it, because it feels very different than any other kind of stimulation. And it is sort of reminiscent of the feeling of having to pee. And that's only because most of the time, the only time we're aware of our urethra is when we're about to urinate or when we're urinating, right? So when you're stimulating that spongy area, it feels great, but it does jiggle your urethra a little bit. And so the first few times it happens, you can be like, does that feel good, or do I need to pee? That's kind of the sensation. And after it's happened a few times, you can really learn to distinguish one from the other. The good news is that you're not going to pee from stimulating that, assuming that you're aroused. Because if you're aroused and if it's feeling good, that means that tissue has swelled up and it has pinched off the flow of urine from the bladder to the outside of the body, in the same way that a prostate does for somebody with a penis.
Wonderful. There's an image that you shared one time with one of my classes that I share with everybody to say, like, look at this wonderful system of our bodies.
Yeah, it's a really amazing thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. So since we're talking about orgasms, we've had some questions about feeling like possibly they've never had an orgasm before, and that doesn't feel good, makes you feel broken.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
I would say first to try to think back through your own kind of sensual or erotic history, which, like, both of those words are kind of gross. And I mean, they're not gross. They're just like, if you ever stole your mom's, like, romance novels, her, what are those? Anyway, any of those, if you stole any of those as a kid and you were reading them and you're like, this is kind of hot, but also yuck. Anyway, if you think back through your own erotic or sensual past, kind of try to remember if you've had that, like, weird low down clenching of the muscles when you've been turned on by other things. Again, maybe somebody said something sexy to you. Maybe you saw someone you thought was really hot. Maybe you were watching some porn, something like that. And you just felt that involuntary clenching of those muscles, even really briefly, like just a really quick clench. If that has happened to you, then you have already had an orgasm. It just wasn't this, like, giant technicolor explosion the way the media expects us to feel, or the way the media depicts. And then we expect to feel like this, like, angels are singing and, like, there's waterfalls nearby and, like, the clouds clear and it's a beautiful starlit night. It doesn't happen like that for everyone. And if you've had that happen, if you've ever had that involuntary clenching of those muscles when you were even a little bit aroused, then you know kind of which muscles are working for an orgasm and kind of the beginning of what that feels like. And you can intentionally prompt your body to do those things more and more. So if it was a sexy thing that you read, then read more sexy things. If it was a sexy conversation you had with a partner, ask if you can engage in more sexy talk and see if you can elicit that response more times and more times. I think it also helps if you can recall that sensation. Then if you're masturbating or having sex, you can, as you start to get close to feeling that clenching again, you kind of know what you're looking for and you can figure out how to ride that wave. if you do look all the way back through your mental history, erotic and sensual history, and you can't recall ever having had that clenching, then it's possible that there's something kind of going on with your body or with your psyche, and it might not be a bad idea to run it by your gynecologist or your therapist and just make sure that everything's kind of, doing what it was designed to do. And if not, there are definitely either therapies if it's a psyche thing, or there are medications and things if it's a physical issue that are happening. But you're not broken. There are a lot of people in the world who don't have orgasms. About 5% of the overall population is anorgasmic. And while 5% doesn't sound like a huge number, if you consider that there are like 8 billion people on the planet, and you take 5% of that, you can see that you're definitely not alone.
Oh, that's like a bigger percentage than people with red hair, right?
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
small percentage.
Exactly. So you're not broken, your body just works differently. And even if you are a person who is literally physically anorgasmic, it doesn't mean you can't have really great relationships, and it doesn't even mean you can't have really great sex. Like sometimes sex is better when you're not reaching for the orgasm. Orgasms are great, don't get me wrong, but long, slow sex where you get to enjoy all kinds of physical touch and intimacy for hours and hours without reaching a peak and having your hormones tell you it's over, that can also be pretty great.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I have a couple more serious questions along the same lines. This
All
is
right.
part of our Sexual Assault Awareness Month webinar series that we're doing. So
Yeah.
we have a couple questions, get questions often about reclaiming sexuality after an assault, how to feel comfortable with your own body and how to feel comfortable with future partners.
Yeah, so I'll start this answer by saying the obvious thing that probably you've already heard a million times, which is I really hope that you feel comfortable getting some therapy so that you can integrate the experiences and help your mind and your body kind of get back in sync together. Because sometimes after an assault, when some time passes, and that amount of time is going to be different from person to person, your body may start to feel like it would really like sex again, and your mind is still trying to protect you because of the previous incident that happened, right? And so there can be some discordance. On the flip side, there can also be a point where you want to have a new relationship, or you want to continue the relationship you're having, and you're feeling like you really should have sex again, like either to please a partner or because we have this belief in our culture that we have to get back on the horse again, and it's not going to get better if we don't just force it. But then your body is giving you the feedback that says, absolutely, I'm not into this right now. So there can be some discordance. So if you can access therapy, good, compassionate therapy, that would be a thing that I would recommend. And it's not the only thing I would recommend. Also, I think it's a good idea if you're at a point where you want to resume sexual activity following that kind of trauma, any kind of trauma like that, to start with masturbation, start figuring your own body out again, figure out not only what feels good, which is very important, and what's going to get you the result that you're looking for, which is important, but also getting your body used to being touched again, rebuilding trust between your mind and your body, like really processing. You may not like the same things that you liked before, and that's okay. And you can have a chance to figure out. You can also kind of get used to this idea, again, that not all touch has to lead to orgasm. And so just the long, slow exploration of your own body, getting to know yourself, claiming yourself for you, not for anybody else. You don't belong to the person who assaulted you. You don't belong to your parents anymore, because a lot of us, especially in college, we're doing that differentiation. You don't belong to your partner, the one you want to have sex with or who wants to have sex with you. You belong to you. And so I think that kind of process can be really healing. If you're in a relationship with somebody now, or you're hoping to start a relationship, really talk to your partner about the importance of non-sexual intimacy. A lot of that would be like non-sexual touch, if you're comfortable with that. So hand holding, putting arm around each other while you watch TV, snuggling, maybe kissing without the expectation that that sex is going to happen afterwards. Things like that, with no expectation that they're going to lead to sex, right? There are lots of other kinds of intimacy too that don't involve touching. And for some people, any touching is going to be too much touching at first. So reading to each other, sharing, it's so stupid. Sharing memes is huge. Me and my partner build so much intimacy by sharing memes and GIFs with each other. Email and text exchanges, hanging out in the same space, working on your own project. Sharing things about your past, not necessarily, I'm not talking about like dredging up the history that you're working so hard to process, but like when you were a kid, what things did you like? What was your favorite color? Who's your favorite dinosaur? Like these kinds of silly things, and they can be deeper things, favorite novels. Here's a poem I read in class that I liked. Those kinds of things all build intimacy as well. Eating together, cooking together. So it doesn't have to be touch-based intimacy. But as you do that more and more with a person, this tiny part of your brain back here, kind of the fight or flight initiator, will start to integrate this person as a safe space in your life, and will stop, hopefully, throwing out danger signals when they are nearby or when you're thinking about being physical with that person. So those are kind of some starting points that I've got.
Great. One other question along the same lines, which is less directly related to sex. Do you have any recommendations for people who are trying to figure out how to talk to family or friends about an assault or about a violent relationship, especially if it's someone that their friends or family weren't really supportive of the relationship?
Yeah, that's kind of a layered answer too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that it's important to know that you don't owe other people an explanation about your relationship or about why it ended or anything. You don't owe anyone that. And so that's kind of the first thing. If you don't want to tell people what happened, you don't have to tell people. But if you're at a point where you do feel like you want to open up, you want to share with your close friends or your family what happened so that you can get more support from them, that is also really, really, really valid. And I think it's okay to start a conversation with, I have something that's really important to me that I need to share with you. And I understand that you might need to process this and talk about this, but I don't want to be the one, I'm not capable of being the one that you process it with. So I'm going to need you to take that processing and talk to somebody else about it. And I'm reaching out to you because I need your love or your support, or I need financial assistance because I had to suddenly leave home because of this. Like, these are the things I need. And I want you to tell me directly if you can or cannot do that. But I cannot be involved in your processing about what happened. And that's a really okay boundary to set for people. And it really actually, it often goes a really long way. If somebody slips up and they decide, a day or a week later that they have to say, I always thought, it's okay to put that boundary back up. Like, I can't process this with you. I'm in therapy, or I'm working through it. I'm doing these things on my own, but you have to handle that. Like, that's your thing to work through. So put up the boundary, ask for the support you need, be prepared in case they feel like they can't give that support, right? And then maintain the line that you have about it. Yeah.
I love that line. I can't process this with you.
Yeah.
That's great.
I can't process this with you. You need to find someone else to process it with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have had several questions recently about exploring sexuality. People who have previously dated only one gender and are now exploring more than that. I don't know the specific question in there. Advice on like getting comfortable with that idea with yourself and trying to be open with others, I guess.
I think one of the biggest things that comes up in our head, whether we word it this way or not, and it comes up in this situation and a lot of other situations, is what does that make me, right? Our sexual orientation, our own gender identity, these are such key pieces of who we are. And when we feel these things changing, even in terms of just who we're attracted to, it can put us into a real identity crisis of like, oh my God, what does that make me? Like, I just need to know, like, now am I gay? Am I lesbian? Am I bisexual? Am I pansexual? Oh my God, I haven't wanted sex with anybody in 10 months. Am I asexual? What does that make me? Right. And in like sexuality education, we call that period of our lives the questioning phase, right? It's what one of the Qs in LGBTQIAA stands for, is questioning. We also know from a lot of research that's been done, when people are in a questioning phase, that's actually like the most dangerous time. You're the most vulnerable both to harm from yourself and harm from the outside. And that's because when we don't know who we are, or we think we don't know who we are, right, then it's really hard to kind of navigate the world. We don't know how, like, we've suddenly lost the map to our lives. And so one of the pieces of advice that I like to give is to be questioning, question everything all the time, But when you're questioning like who you're attracted to, which it means kind of questioning your sexual orientation, go ahead and grab that and use that as an identity. Instead of saying like, I don't know who I am, I don't know who I like, I don't know who I want to have sex with anymore, I don't know anything, I'm so confused, all valid feelings, say, you know what I am right now is I'm questioning. I'm on a journey and I'm figuring it out. I'm a traveler. I'm questioning. And at the other side of this, I'm going to have a better idea and I will tell y'all, or I will tell myself, I will update you when the information is known. And then like in a more practical way, if you're attracted to a person of any gender and they are returning that attraction and the two of you want to figure out how to kind of put your bodies together in ways that feel good, then there's no reason not to do that. If it's consensual and it's mutual, and it just takes, like, if these are body parts you're not familiar with, if this is a new experience and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm used to an outie and you've got an innie and now I'm not sure what to do, you can always ask. You can say like, what feels good? Or this feels good to me. Does that feel good to you? And use those good communication skills to figure out how to get started on that. Orientation for a lot of people is kind of fluid. Yes, there are people who know at the age of 3 years old that they are going to grow up to be a gay cis man and like that's their identity and it stays that way until they die. That is definitely an experience that happens in the world. But for a lot of us, it's a lot more like, I think, so like I'm a cis woman and I think I'm kind of into girls, but I'm really into guys. And so maybe I'm kind of bisexual, but now I'm married. So I guess I'm basically straight, at least, you know, practically speaking. And then now I'm not married anymore. And now I am sort of into girls. So maybe I'm bisexual again. And oh crap, you know what? I don't want to have sex with men anymore. And now I guess I'm queer, right? Like, and that is more what a lot of people experience in their lifetime, even if it just goes from like, I could never imagine having sex with somebody who identifies as a man ever, ever in my life, to I don't really want to have sex with a man or the person who identifies as a man, but I can see the appeal, right? Even that is fluidity, even if it's a smaller degree of fluidity. So learning how to be comfortable with these changes and revelations in yourself. And know that you weren't lying to yourself before. This is rhetoric in the gay community all the time. All these, you were lying to yourself for all those years, or I liked the Indigo Girls my whole life. How did I not know I was gay, right? Like these are things that people say. You're not lying to yourself. Your orientation shifts, it ebbs and flows and changes all the time.
I would like to ask you to clarify something that you said, because you mentioned asexuality, and a lot of people have no idea what that is. Could you talk a little bit more about asexuality, aromanticism?
Yeah. I got in a fight once with, well, he was a real jerk. He was a guy my sister was dating. And I was already out as like, I was a very out and loud queer woman. And he was like, aren't you offended that asexuals want to be recognized as part of the queer had to go to their auntie's house for Christmas and they still don't have somebody that they're dating. Sorry. Zoom is telling me my connection's unstable. Can you hear me?
I lost you for a minute, but when that's happened to me before, the recording has still continued nicely. So we're just going to assume it's all good.
Okay, good. So this is a person who's obviously never had to go to their auntie's house and try to explain why they're still single and put up with people trying to force them onto blind dates and dates with a neighbor and like being told they must be weird because they haven't had sex in so long, or people assuming that they're doing, things the culture doesn't approve of. Like, well, he hasn't had a girlfriend in a long time, so he must be paying for sex somewhere, right? Or doing things like that. So first I want to say, like, that's crap. Asexuality is a valid sexual orientation. And what it means is, and like everything else, it's on a spectrum. So like kind of the definition is a person who's asexual is a person who doesn't want to have sex with other people, but it's a spectrum. So you'll see people who are interested in sex once a year or a couple times a year. You'll see people who never want to have sex with other people, but are really comfortable with masturbation. You'll see people who never want to masturbate or have sex with other people. And so like those are all on that spectrum. And there are a million other points on that spectrum. Those are just a couple of examples, right? A lot like people used to say about lesbianism is like, well, you had this trauma with a man and that's why you want women. People will say that somebody had a bad experience with sex. And so that must be why they don't have interest in sex, or they've never met the right person. That's another trope that gets thrown around for every color on the queer flag, queer rainbow. And maybe somebody has had a bad experience and that led them to asexuality, but most of the time it's just an innate orientation in the same way that being straight is, that being bisexual is, that being a lesbian is, that being a gay man is. It's just an orientation, and it's not a defect. Just like no other orientation is a defect. And you also mentioned aromantic. I love this separation now. Separation might not be quite the right word, but the distinguishing between sexual orientation and romantic orientation. I love that we can say like, I am pan-romantic, but mostly straight or something. I always get lost halfway through those. My phone is blowing up. I'm so sorry. I'm a midwife and I'm on call, so I have to pay attention to it. But so aromantic, much like asexual, means I'm not oriented towards like those kind of romantic relationships. And that doesn't mean like I don't like Jane Austen novels, right? I don't like to walk outside with violins playing, drinking a London fog. It means like that kind of relationship with the sweet nothing texts that go back and forth and the cozy night in for dinner with the thought that you're going to cuddle or have sex at the end. I'm not oriented that way. But people who are aromantic are often sexual in various ways, have a different sexual orientation. And they are folks who still have really great, beautiful, meaningful friendships, family relationships, and all of that. Just not oriented towards having kind of what we think of as romantic relationships.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think I have one more, I don't know, easy question.
All right.
Can you talk about UTIs?
Yeah.
They are, how to cure them, how you get them, or maybe not how you get them, how you can avoid them.
Yeah, we can talk about all those things. So UTI stands for urinary tract infections. And your urinary tract is the same urethra that I already talked about, and your bladder, which I mentioned briefly. And then from your bladder, I'm going to go top down instead of bottom up. That makes more sense. The very topmost portion of your urinary tract is your kidneys. You have two of them, one on the right side, one on the left side. And then coming out from each kidney is what a little tube called a ureter. And the ureter travels down to your bladder. And then from the bladder is the urethra, which goes to takes urine from the outside of your body. For most people, UTIs start bottom up though. So they almost always start at the urethra, move up into the bladder, eventually into the ureters, one side or both, and then into the kidneys, one side or both. If you are noticing signs of a UTI, which we'll talk about in just a second, I really encourage you to take action quickly when it's still an infection in either your urethra or just your urethra or your bladder. Sometimes also called bladder infections. That's not uncommon. And not wait until you've got a situation where the infection has traveled up your ureters to one or both of your kidneys. Kidney infections are very, very serious. Bladder infections are usually easy to treat. So getting correct treatment right away is going to save you a lot of pain, fevers, days missed from school or work. Like by the time you're diagnosed with a kidney infection, the advice is like, go home, go to bed, you're on bed rest, you don't do anything, and it can last from a few days to a few weeks. So if you start having the signs or symptoms of a UTI, I would seek treatment right away. Those symptoms commonly include pain or burning when you pee, like distinctly while you're peeing. And I've heard it described as it feels like fire. It feels like I'm trying to pee glass. I don't know what it feels like. It made me scream. You may or may not see a little bit of blood when you pee. Some people have really obvious blood with every urinary tract infection, and some people only have what's called occult blood, which is, that's a funny term to me. It always makes me think of like sacred rituals in the middle of the night in the forest under the full moon. But it just means that the blood is broken down into tiny enough pieces that it's not visible with your eyes. So that burning, that pain with urination is sort of the classic sign. Frequency of urination, all of a sudden you have to pee constantly, like as frequently as every 10 to 15 minutes. But it could only be like, if you're normally a person who pees every 4 hours, now you're peeing every hour or two, right? A sense of, I just peed, I stood up, and now I have to pee again. Wait, I'm going to sit back down. Nothing's coming up. I stood up. Now I feel like I have to pee again. I sat back down, right? That over and over and over again. An urgency to the feeling of peeing. Like you're sitting in class and you're like, oh God, I kind of got to pee. I'll go between classes. Class will be over in 20 minutes. I'll go between classes. And then you're like, oh no, I have to go now. There's no waiting 20 minutes and you're scrambling to get to the bathroom on time. You might also feel a heavy pressure or a sense of internal warmth right over your pubic bone. Your bladder sits right behind your pubic bone. And so that can be a sign from your bladder. A fever is not an uncommon symptom of a UTI. Body aches happen pretty quickly. If it starts and you don't get treatment right away, you get body aches, headache, a malaise. It's funny to me how often a malaise is a clinical symptom of something because most people don't know what it means. And also, I feel like during this pandemic, it's really hard to separate a clinical malaise from kind of the state of being. Mm-hmm. Malaise is a French word and it translates literally as a feeling of badness. And it just is like, you're tired, you feel sort of hopeless, like you're watching TV and you don't care. The only thing good is that your cat is by your feet, but he's also sort of an asshole, so it doesn't matter. You can tell you're kind of hungry, but it's not worth getting up to go to the fridge. Like that's kind of what a malaise is. How to treat one. I am a midwife and I can tell you all sorts of really great natural remedies, which will probably work if you start treating as soon as you notice symptoms. But they can be really expensive for people on a budget and they don't always work. And so my advice to anyone who thinks they have a UTI is to go ahead and get care somewhere from someone who can write you a prescription. Can Campus Health prescribe medication up there? Do you know?
I think so. I know it's limited, but they can prescribe some things.
Okay, yeah, so probably UTI medication it's an easy one. It's usually a penicillin or a Z-Pak. It's pretty easy. So get antibiotics, take your antibiotics the whole time, really super hydrate. People talk about drinking cranberry juice all the time to help with a UTI. really, in order to drink enough cranberry juice to help with an actual infection, you would have to drink so much cranberry juice that you would end up giving yourself an ulcer. So if you want to do cranberry in addition to whatever else you're doing, get cranberry pills. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to not rot your gut, and it'll be more effective. And if you want to try to treat it holistically without antibiotics, again, do not recommend, but you can do like 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, a whole lot of garlic capsules. Don't be a person who's like, I'll just eat the garlic, because again, you're going to give yourself an ulcer before you can get enough into reach a medicinal level. And then take an oral probiotic, one of the ones that's designed for like the reproductive health tract that you have. Most people who get UTIs are folks with vulvas and vaginas. People with penises don't get them that often. A UTI can just happen spontaneously for no apparent reason. And that's frustrating. They happen most commonly though from sex, and in particular sex with a new partner or with a new toy. And it's due to pH changes. And if you're having penetrative sex, whatever's penetrating you is also pushing a little bit of bacteria up into your urethra during penetration, during thrusting. For that reason, we recommend getting up and peeing every time you've had sex, even if you're going to go back to bed and have more sex. Get up and go pee and come back to bed. And just generally doing things like not using strong soaps and powders on your genitals is a really important step too. Your genitals don't actually need to be washed with soap unless you want them to. And if you decide you're going to, get something that's really pH balanced and designed for very, very sensitive skin. I feel like I'm missing one of the recommendations for avoiding UTIs.
Well, I thought of another question related to this. So
Yeah.
The cranberry juice recommendation is something I've heard a lot, but I'm questioning whether, especially if you like tried to do that in conjunction with an antibiotic, could increase your chances of a yeast infection if you have if that's a lot more sugar for your body than normal. Would that be the case? I mean, antibiotics increase your risk anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And most likely, if your UTI is caused by the fact that you've started having sex with a new partner, or you got a new sex toy, or you changed lube, you're already going to be dealing with either yeast or bacterial vaginosis. Bacterial vaginosis is not an STI, but it frequently comes when we start having sex with a new partner. And then eventually our body gets used to that partner's body or to the condoms that we're using or whatever. And it adjusts, and then we stop getting BV and yeast infections, but often they do all go hand in hand. So yeah, drinking that much juice is definitely a possible implication for an increased risk of UTI. Just take the cranberry pills, really. Don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Again,
I mean, that's really what I hear from everyone. Like, oh, you're getting UTI, just drink cranberry juice and you'll be fine.
well, and most cranberries are so bitter that most cranberry juice has sugar added to it, or it has a sugary juice added to it. So it's like a cran grape or something like that, cran apple. And so you have to find a cranberry juice with no other juice added and no sugar added. And I'm just going to tell you, it doesn't taste good. I'm probably offending cranberry juice lovers of the world out there right now, but for most people.
I mean, it's Wisconsin. We produce all the cranberries, so there's got to be.
We do. Us in Michigan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that the last one you had for me? I did get a couple as well.
Yes, I think that's the last one I had.
All right, I'll read a couple from that I got too. When dating someone, how many times is it average to have sex in a week? And that is such a silly question, because it's going to depend on you and the person and how much interest you have in sex and how much free time you have. I would say that most people, when they're first dating someone, or when the person they're dating, they start having sex, you're going to have a lot more sex in the beginning. And that's because of the way our brains work and the fact that our brains are trying to figure out the best, fastest way to have amazing orgasms or pleasure with this partner. And the way that you do that is by having sex a lot and having sex for a long time. And then once we figure it out and you're like, okay, so how it goes is I go down on you, and then you go down on me, and then we use our hands, and then we end with penetrative sex, and we've both had great orgasms. And you can get that down to 7 minutes, 5 minutes. And then people start wondering what's wrong? the fire went out. No, the fire didn't go out, friends. It's just, that's how our brain works. Our brain wants to make things efficient. But once you get to that point, you also start having other thoughts in your head, like, we could have sex now, or we could go get bagels, right? And then you just start having sex less often. And so that's really, really common. I would say that the number that we get from research is that most people in America who are in relationships have sex 2.2 times per week. And I don't know if that 0.2 is like a quick wink in the shower or what we're talking about there, but 2.2. But I know people who are in relationships who have sex twice a day, every day, almost guaranteed, and people in relationships who have sex maybe once a month, and they all qualify their sex life as satisfying because they have communication with their partner and they're making a decision based on what works for them. So it varies widely. I get this question a lot. It's the next one, and that is, can a virgin have an STD? And this one is always a little hard for me to unpack because I don't believe in virginity, because it's a social construct that was designed entirely on the principle that women, and in this case, we're talking like in a historical perspective, cis women who were the property of their fathers, that having not been penetrated by anyone in the past increased their value when they were sold for their wedding. And that's where virginity comes from. And I just can't buy into that kind of as a way of life or a belief system. Also, when we talk about virginity, we discount that there are so many amazing ways to have sex that are not penis and vagina penetration, right? And so when we're talking about like, can a virgin have an STI? I want to know what that means. Does that mean that you have never had any sexual contact with another person ever, only with yourself? Then no, there's no way that you could have an STI. But if you're a virgin only in that you have never had penis and vagina sex, but you've had other kinds of sex play, you've had oral sex, or you've, jerked each other off, things like that, then yeah, you could have an STI for sure, because most STIs can be transmitted by touch, by mouth, and as well as by penetrative sex. So when we go through all of that, and I'm like, yeah, you could have an STI if you've done those things, sure. I know I sound really nonchalant, and that's because I feel pretty nonchalant about it. I think that we've got a lot of we just have a lot of sexual angst about infections that we get from having sex with each other, as if they're somehow inherently, ethically, morally worse than getting a cold or having the flu, or finding out that you work at a daycare and you got ringworm or scabies from the kids you were taking care of, right? Like, a virus is a virus is a virus. A bacteria is a bacteria is a bacteria. A parasite is a parasite is a parasite. And the fact that some of them are passed distinctly from sexual contact doesn't make them worse and doesn't make you a bad person, right? You want to be careful and not transfer infections, which I feel like we've really learned a big lesson about since March of 2020. And you want to be responsible. And if you have signs of an infection of any kind, you want to get tested and treated appropriately, because that's responsible. But you're not a bad person if you get COVID, and you're not a bad person if you get the flu, and you're not a bad person if you get chlamydia. You just take care of yourself and protect your partners until your infection's gone. That's all.
And a lot of those infections are so easy to treat now that we've got it down of like, take a week of meds and then you're fine.
Yeah. Get a shot in your butt and you're done. Let me see if I can find one more good short question, because we only got 5 minutes left.
Sounds great.
Oh yeah, this is a good one, because April is also STI Awareness Month.
Great.
Every month is a lot of things these days.
So many months.
It's so many things all at once. Sorry, it's allergy season. Give me one quick second. Woof, the trees are blooming. Okay.
We have snow here.
Yeah, I know. My partner is driving from Eau Claire to my daughter's house in Horicon today, and I'm somehow in the text thread of how the trip is going. This is not information I need to have. But I keep getting these text updates like, hit another band of snow, pulled over for a few minutes. Yeah. Our final question will be, how often should I get tested for STIs? And I think that's a great question. And like a lot of what we've already talked about, it's sort of a layered question. How often will your insurance company cover you getting tested for STIs? Once per year, plus any times that you have symptoms of an STI. And so that's not very many times a year if you are hooking up with friends or loved ones at parties on campus somewhere, when you go home to visit friends or whatever. And you really should be tested between encounters, between partners, right? People who are having sex with a lot of different folks should probably be tested every 3 months in order to make sure that they're still engaging in safe sexual practices. But it can be really hard to access testing every 3 months because insurance companies have decided that if you're not having symptoms and it's not your yearly exam, you don't need to be tested. So I recommend finding in your community organizations that do low cost or no cost testing for you, because they are not going to stick to your insurance's rules about that. So here in Milwaukee, and I know you all are not here in Milwaukee, but as a for instance, here in Milwaukee, you can get free STI testing at the public health clinic. Milwaukee County runs a clinic, and like 3 days a week, it's all on their website, you can go in and get STI tested for anything and they'll do the testing, right? I'm sure your community probably has something similar.
Oak Public Health offers STI testing. I know it's free sometimes. I'm not positive if it's always free, but they do offer that regularly. So it's at least low cost.
And Planned Parenthood has free STI testing every April, and it's April. So go get yourself tested right now and make it a recurring reminder on your calendar every April that you can get free testing at Planned Parenthood every April. There are other, like most communities also have other free or low cost STI clinic. You're just going to have to do a Google search. If for some reason you're uncomfortable doing a Google search because you don't want it to come up in your history, then do private browsing. But you really should be able to find other resources to get tested more often. Again, if you are in a monogamous relationship, you're not changing partners at all, then once a year testing is probably fine, as long as you feel very certain that you and your partner are both being monogamous.
Yeah, I'll mention that. I know campus also does STI testing, and that they occasionally run specials where you get, they have it like separated of 2 tests. I don't remember specifically what they are, but they run specials where you get like everything for $25.
I love it. Good. Take advantage of that while you're in school. There's lots of these things that, a lot of these things that you have as resources as a student that you don't have when you're out in the rest of the world. So definitely live it up. You are already paying for that service with your tuition. So go ahead and take advantage.
Yes.
I had fun.
I did too. This was lovely.
Invite me back if you want. I'd love to do it again.
Okay. Sounds
all
good.
right.
I'm going to stop recording.
Have a good day, everybody.